The important premise to know is about insulin. Insulin is the key factor of everything. Insulin tells the body to store fat. The ability of insulin to store fat is how we survive famine for all these years. But now we have McDonald's, so we don't have famine. So essentially what happens in the body because of insulin is a dynamic thing. So we have 3 macronutrients. We have proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. Of the 3, 2 of them are essential, meaning the body has to have them to live, and you can only get them from food. Essential amino acids, protein. Essential fatty acids, fat. Those are essential. Those you have to have them. But there's no such thing as an essential carbohydrate because the body can create glucose, which is what happens when we eat carbs. Eat a carb, not all carbs. Like you can't eat a Brussels sprout and have this happen, but you can eat a potato and this is what occurs. So the insulin response happens as a result of you eat the starchy carbohydrate, sugar goes up in the blood, pancreas releases insulin, insulin pushes the sugar out of the blood so you don't die of acidic toxicity, and that sugar ends up going into the cells as glycogen, which is stored energy, and that's how we survive famine. Somehow I think I missed a loop, but either way, so that is the premise of these 3 macronutrients. There's no such thing as an essential carbohydrate because the body can, remember, sugar goes up, insulin pushes the sugar out of the blood so you don't die of toxicity, otherwise known as also diabetic ketoacidosis in some people. And so it goes into the cell, it becomes stored energy, glycogen, which eventually becomes fat if it doesn't get burned or metabolized, really. And as a result, sorry, my dog just killed my train of thought. So if the body can store this energy, the body can retrieve it through glyconeogenesis. Glyconeogenesis is the body's ability to take stored energy, turn it into glucose, which is the body's primary energy source. That's how we can store fat, store energy, excess carbs, and then retrieve it and then use it to burn because glucose is necessary for the Krebs cycle, which is necessary for generation of ATP, and now we're getting way too into this. So the fundamental key is what triggers insulin response. So the trigger of insulin response is actually quite simple. The 3 macronutrients, fat. When you eat a fat and then you measure your glucose in the 2 hours that it requires to peak, fat doesn't trigger insulin response at all. Therefore, fat doesn't store fat because if you don't trigger insulin, and insulin stores fat because remember, stored energy, glucose, fat is not glucose, fat is fat. So then protein, the amino acids. A little bit of a hump, but protein is demand driven, and that is a whole other topic for another, I don't even think I'm qualified to talk about that. But protein does trigger insulin response somewhat, but honestly, I did the carnivore diet for like 27 days out of my goal was 30, and I had to stop because I was losing so much weight. I had to quit. So protein doesn't actually spike insulin response in the way that fat storage occurs. So what are we looking at? So what triggered me here was the grapes thing. There are 16 grams of carbohydrates in 1 cup of grapes. Now, a carbohydrate that is a fructose base, which is fruit sugar, is God's candy. It essentially is, the food pyramid told us to eat all this fruit. No, oh my gosh, this is why everybody's diabetic. Because of all the grains and all the fruit in that stupid food pyramid. Remember, the top was like fat, and they're like, don't eat the fat. And then the next part was protein and meat. Marginally eat the protein and meat sparingly. Meanwhile, the top 2 tiers of that are the 2 things that are essential that we have to live. So this video is going to get way too long to upload if I go into all that. So at any rate, essentially, if you keep the carbs low, remember they're not essential to live. The body can extract glucose without the food. from glyconeogenesis, then if anything that you're adding that spikes the insulin response that is a high carb, which 16 grams of carbohydrates in grapes isn't as bad as one banana, which is 36 grams of carbohydrates in a medium banana, but it's not nearly as bad as berries, which are low fructose, strawberries, blackberries, blueberries, raspberries. They say that those are the lower ones to eat that have less of that insulin spike. So, I keep saying so. I hate that I do that. You want to have a carb fruit that is 12, 10, or quantity lowers that amount, but essentially too many carbs or enough carbs causing insulin response, telling the body to store fat, is what the problem is with obesity in America, thanks to the Food Pyramid 1977. So with that, I'm gonna stop here and edit, maybe, I don't know, we'll see. But that's a basic premise of certain of the whole carb and I just don't see the benefit of grapes or of anything that is a high spiking insulin response, because insulin resistance occurs as a result of years of spiking insulin, the body trying to remove it from the blood, and therefore the cells eventually don't recognize insulin anymore. That's type 2 diabetes, insulin resistance. Spike, 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 spike. Food Pyramid told us to eat this. 30 years later of Crispix and lactose-rich milk and a side of orange juice and maybe some sugar on my cereal to sweeten it up. And hey, we're all diabetic now, and it's the government's fault because the Food Pyramid was like, that's good. Eat all the grains and don't eat the fat. And fat doesn't spike insulin, and now we're all diabetic. Oh, God. I have so much more on this. Anyways, yeah, if you made it this far, congrats. Thanks for listening.